Hello and welcome to the Christopher Hall Training Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about dealing with tough YouTube questions. So this is something I commonly get, and I try my best to give the most sort of detailed and thorough answer that I can with regards to the context and the nuance that it requires to be able to understand it properly. So what we're going to do now is get stuck into, first of all, the question and then how I went about dealing with it. If you are struggling with lower back pain and you do want some help, click the link below and you'll go through to my How to Overcome Lower Back Pain consultation and coaching, where we're able to build you a plan to be able to get out of your lower back pain. If not eliminate it, we can certainly minimize it. If you are a professional and you want help understanding lower back pain more and helping your clients more with their lower back pain, then again, click the link below. Or the other link below, and you'll go through to my How to Overcome Lower Back Pain Train the Trainer, where you just enter your details and I'll be able to send you more details about what the workshops and the course involves. So how do I go about dealing with tough questions on YouTube? Now, as a preface to all of this, I'm happy with these questions. I'm not insulted by people questioning my videos. I do get some quite detailed questions, which is good, which in some respects I enjoy because it keeps my mind sharp, it keeps me engaged in where the industry is, it keeps me understanding the context that I want to put information in, because as a wider sort of aspect of this and wider in science in general, is we have to understand conclusions and the science in the context that it's being put within. So with regards to what we're going to talk about in this, there's an article from, where's it from? The journal, where is it from? Where is it? And on the screen here I've got various bits of detail that I'm going to be using. So if you see me looking over here, that's what I'm looking at. It's from the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy. So that was a reference that was used in the sort of the conversation thread within this question. And we have to understand the context at which the information was put. So not only can you understand this from a lower back perspective, this is also, the principles of this can be used in the wider scientific understanding and reading of articles and things like that. So that's a little bit of a preface. So what is the question about? The question's about one of my videos, which is about back extensions, glute activation and spine flexion. So as I mentioned, the paper is from the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports and Physical Therapy. It is called, which you could just type into Google and you'll find it, To Flex or Not to Flex. Is there a relationship between lumbar spine flexion during lifting and lower back pain? So in the title it says, is there a relationship between it? But as we read through, it's more of they're more talking about a cause. So again, we have to understand, is there a relationship between it? Quite probably. Is it a cause? Quite probably, but that's what they're not clarifying. Within the article, it's talking about, is it a cause or not? But in the title, is it a relationship or not? Because they're two completely different things. Is it related? Well, there are plenty of people that have bent over to lift something and their back has gone. So yes, it is related to it. Was that the cause? That's up to be debated. We have to dig deeper into it, which is what I'll do when I go through one of my responses, which talks about some of the limitations of this. And they do have limitations in this study, but I am adding more to that. So it's a study of, and I'm just going to read the little abstract bit here because again, the whole thing goes into too much detail. So it is a review of, I think, 11 studies on lower back pain. There is a criteria in which they use to include certain studies and not include certain studies. And some of that is specific lower back pain. So what they're essentially talking about is non-specific low back pain. where there is, if you look at the definition of non-specific lower back pain, it is said that there is to be no known cause of the lower back pain. But if you listen to McGill, he often says that's just a heading or a label that's used when people don't know more about lower back pain, because the specific lower back pain that they talk about is bit of a word, radiculopathy, nerve root irritation, spinal stenosis, rheumatologic inflammatory, e.g. rheumatoid arthritis, or neurological conditions, e.g. multiple sclerosis. So if there was any studies with any of that in it, they were excluded. So the ones they found with specific lower back pain, they were excluded. It's now only the non-specific lower back pain, because, so again, that's another one that brings a little bit more context to the title, which is the relationship between lumbar flexion during lifting and low back pain. So they've eliminated specific lower back pain, so it should really be lumbar spine flexion during lifting and non-specific lower back pain. So you can start to see, as you, well, first of all, as you understand lower back pain more, where the holes are within various studies. So we've got the criteria of what they've included and what they've not included. What we then get down to are the measurement devices, lumbar spine marker, sensor placement, and lifted object. Now we're going to focus on the lifted object, and I mean, you can also see here C12, T12, L5, ASIS. So they're placing it, or in one of the studies, all the way down the spine. They're placing it only on the lumbar vertebra. They're placing it through thoracic. So there's different placements, so you can understand that. But what we've also got is the object lifted. And it goes all the way from a pen to a light box to a box that weighs 8.3 kilos, all the way up to a 12 kilo box. So basically from a pen to a 12 kilo box. So what we can now start talking about is some of the criteria, or how the study was done. So again, this is important because when we're talking about non-specific lower back pain, we have to delve deep into the lower back pain and its triggers. So for example, you can have one person that has a flexion intolerant spine when they go to pick up a pen from the floor. You can have another non-specific lower back pain trigger, which could be sat in the car for 20 minutes. You could have another one that when they're sat at their desk, it's a problem, but when they sit in the car, it's fine, or vice versa. You could have another one, which is when they go out walking for a longer period of time. So there are all these different sort of caveats with regards to non-specific lower back pain. So for some people, so you could say that maybe some of these people that were used in the studies, they didn't have a lifting trigger within their lower back pain, because again, this needs to be assessed. When you go through the consultation and assessment, online or face-to-face, this is something that we pull out of you with the questions that are asked. Is, you know, we're talking about your triggers. When does it trigger? What specific scenario does it do it within? So it might be in some of these that there wasn't that. Now, with regard to spine flexion as well, it could also be that the weight that was used, so the 12 kilo box, which was the heaviest one, that wasn't outside of their tolerance. The 12 kilo, lifting a 12 kilo box once was within their tolerance. So when they go and lift it up with the flex spine, it's their pain is absolutely zero. They feel nothing. They just go down, pick it up and bring it and take it to wherever they need to take it. So that's another part of the study. Did they only test it once? And did they confirm from the individual taking it that lifting a 12 kilo box is going to trigger their lower back pain because that's what's happened in the past, or it's just it's within their capacity and they can do it? Because if it is, then they're always going to come out with that it's that spine flexion doesn't affect their lower back pain. And what I should also say is, if we just go to the conclusion, is they say in the conclusion, there is currently no credible longitudinal or cross-sectional evidence to suggest that a more flexed lumbar spine during lifting is a risk factor for lower back pain onset or persistence, or a differentiator in people with or without lower back pain. So basically they're saying there is no credible evidence to say that it's a problem. But again, as we've sort of described so far, we don't know that, because we're just generalising, first of all, lower back pain, and we're not looking at the individual's lower back pain. So, is the weight within their tolerance of being able to do it? Did they only lift it once? Because lifting it once may be okay. Did they lift it many times? So what is their capacity with regards to the endurance and the repetition? So can they lift it once? Can they lift it 10 times? Can they lift it 20 times and it not be a problem? Because it's not about, when we talk about spine flexion, it's not about, well, when we talk about back pain, most of back pain isn't done in one event. It's the straw that broke the camel's back, and then it happens in one event. So the build up to the injury took a long time, and then it goes. And then what happens? Then they're in a cycle of the pain reduces over time. So that may take 2, 3, 4 weeks. It reduces, they go back to normal function. Then they go through and repeat poor lifting for, 20, 100 times, and then the back pain goes again. So we have to understand the pain cycle, but also the duration and the pattern that it happens within. Does it happen daily? Does it happen and then go away, and then it comes back again, and then it goes away for a period of time and comes back again? So there's all these different scenarios that we have to understand, that how does the back pain sort of sit. So another part of one of my answers was, did they lift the weight once? Did they lift it many times? Did they get breaks between lifting it many times, if they lifted it many times? And then how long were these breaks? How long did they have to recover? Because again, this will all influence the individual person's lower back pain. So with regards to just lifting a box once and it not causing their pain, that might not be their pattern. They may have had examples where they've been able to lift much heavier things with a flexed spine, but then they get to a certain weight and they have to use a more neutral posture or a less flexed spine, so on and so forth. Did the subjects brace their abdominals during the study? Were they asked to do it? Did they have to be trained to do it? Were they just asked to lift the objects? Because all of these variables will influence the results of a study, and if they haven't measured it, then you can't conclude on that. So what the conclusion should really say is that from our study of these 11 studies, we weren't able to find credible evidence to suggest that the participants that participated aggravated their lower back pain from lifting a pen all the way up to a 12 kilo box, but we don't know what their pain pattern was, because that's an important element to it. Whenever I work with anyone, I need to know their pain pattern. If we can establish and understand the pain pattern, we can remove that pattern, and then we can start rebuilding. Because what he talks about a lot in his comment or in his questions is about being able to and where is it? It's further up here. About being able to load the spine, because being able to load the spine is necessary to be able to rehabilitate the spine. That bit, what he's saying, is true, because you do need to be able to load the spine. But when you load the spine in a painful pattern, then it changes, because pain does funny things within the body, and it does it all on an unconscious level. So you don't realize it's happening. So the spine unconsciously will protect you as best it can. Hence why we're able to get away with so much when it comes to lower back pain. And again, that's another thing that we need to understand, is the unconscious parts to it, which start to come out during the establishment of the pain pattern. So that bit is true, and that's sort of where we can agree. So to say spine flexion and compression is inherently bad is like saying compression or loading of the knee is inherently bad. Can it cause injury if too much is applied too soon? Absolutely. That I agree with, because if you are loading it too soon, but then that begs the question, when is the right time? And that's what he came on to. And that is a much more nuanced sort of question and answer that we need to understand. And you can't understand that without understanding the pain pattern. Now, if we use this scientific study as the example, it's not giving a very well established pain pattern. All it's saying is that if a person picks a 12 kilo box up once with a flex spine, it doesn't hurt it. But that doesn't, if it's just once, as I've mentioned, but does it do it after 10 times? Does it do it after 20 times? Does it do it after, like another example, and I get this a lot when people are moving house, so they're lifting and carrying and getting into and taking things out of boxes for a day. When they come and see me after moving a lot, I don't know how many, because again, I don't know the exact numbers, but more often than not, people will come to me and go, oh, my back. Or if they've been sat in a car for a lot of driving during a week, or more driving than normal, oh, my back. Again, sitting in a car isn't inherently bad, but if you do it too much without proper resilience, then it's going to be a problem. So what we need to be able to do is rebuild the back, but it's the system of how we do that. Because what most people think is that we need to do back extensions for that. Now, as I've mentioned with back extensions, they are I'll call them an unnecessary exercise. There are many exercises out there that do the job that back extensions do, but you minimize the risk of the back extensions. So what that means is the risks of back extensions, because there is so much compression going on the spine. This goes back to understanding the pain pattern. If we've got someone who can't tolerate lots of flexion and or lots of compression, then back extensions isn't going to be useful for them. For someone that can cope with a lot of compression and can cope with a lot of flexion, then back extensions will show that it's not too much of a problem for them. Whether it's a useful thing to do or not, again, is a different question. But whether their pain is triggered by it, it may or it may not. That depends on the pain pattern. And this is what gets lost in scientific articles, and this is what gets lost during when certain people watch my videos. And again, I don't mind it, question it, because what I'm able to do is, and this was another example, is that he uses is about, because I use walking as an example. And if you watch the video, I say I'll use walking as an example of how the back works. Now, walking is an example, it's not the only example, and that's what needs to be understood. It's quite you need to understand how that's worded, and that's why it's worded that way. So I try not to use this is the way to do it. It's more about this is a way to do it, and the rationale around that is the rationale around that. But that's what people don't question, and they don't think about it in that way. They just go, oh, he said walking is an example, therefore I interpret that as walking is the only way is the back functions. No, the back functions in many different ways, because we don't just walk, we lift, we bend, we carry, we push things away from us, we pull things towards us, so on and so our body does all these things. We walk, we run, we sit, we get up. So there's all these different things that the back needs to be able to do. And as I mentioned in the tutorial, walking is just an example of that. So again, It's taking that small bit of information out of context and saying that I only interpret how the back works is how we walk, which isn't true. So it's being able to see that context. But again, most people don't think deeply enough, I think that's the right way to say it, to be able to pick that kind of stuff up and sort of question their initial reaction, if you will. Oh, he said walking. Oh, that means he means walking is the only way the back works. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Did he say that? No, he said walking. Well, no, he said, I will use walking as an example, which means it's an example, not the example. So you need to be able to sort of process that information when you listen to information, not just my information, but any information. So we've got the establishing the pain pattern. We've got the use of back extensions. Now again, that was where I was. It was about, is it inherently bad? No, it's not inherently bad. But with regards to the risks, then there are risks to lower back pain. And the risks are greater in people with lower back pain that have a compression element to their pain and a flexion element to their pain. So we don't do it with them. Now, that then follows into, when do we do it? Well, what we need to first do is we need to first reduce the pain. Now, he goes on and says about robotic movement as well. And the robotic movement is that's not a long-term solution, robotic movement. And nowhere do I say going into a neutral spine is something that we need to do 100% of the time. As I will mention in hopefully all of them, but probably not, there is a time and a place to flex the spine. Now, this goes back and sort of will join the study and what he's saying together, is that flexing a spine isn't inherently bad. You can do it. If there is no load on the spine, so if you go down into a full body weight squat, so you drop ass to grass with no weight, and you go down there, for most people, that will probably be okay, and then you'll come back up and you'll get on with the rest of your life. But there will be some people who can't tolerate even that, because that will put load on the spine. But there are some people that won't be able to tolerate that type of load. And they will not be able to go into that position. So therefore, flexing the spine in that position is not good for them. They may also experience sitting in their car, where they're sort of sat down and flexed into it like you would do on a sofa, that causes a problem. So what you're starting to see is this flexion intolerance, the ability not to flex the spine. Now, as you then start putting weight on that full squat, or you start lifting weight off the floor like a 12 kilo box, again, that might be fine. But there may be some people that can't tolerate 12 kilos, but they can tolerate a bodyweight squat. So you're starting to see that somewhere between a bodyweight squat and lifting a 12 kilo box off the floor, there is their tolerance level. And 12 kilos is over it, but 10 kilos may be within it. So 11 kilos is the tolerance. So it's coming to that understanding of what that tolerance is. Now, again, for some people, bodyweight squat is fine. Lifting a 12 kilo box is fine. But lifting a 20 kilo kettlebell is a problem. And so the example goes on. 20 kilos is fine, and all the below, 12 kilo box and bodyweight squat is absolutely fine. But a 50 kilo barbell is a problem with a flex spine. So what you're starting to see is that people have different tolerances for flexion and compression. And again, compression around the spine is where the muscles engage around the spine and essentially squash it like you would put your hands around a sponge and you would squash it. That's what compression is around the spine. So a back extension puts high amounts of compression, whether it's in neutral or whether it's flexed. It puts high amounts of compression around the spine. So a neutral spine could be a problem for certain people because they have they can tolerate flexion, but they can't tolerate compression. So again, we have to separate compression and flexion. We have to isolate. And this is something else I mentioned in my reply, is all these variables will influence the results of the study. And if they haven't measured each of them in isolation with different types of lower back pain, then again, they will get generic results and give a generic conclusion, which is how it was described. It's not a specific thing, because what I'm starting to do is make back pain or people's tolerances to load through their lower back are different. So their pain gets triggered at different times. So when we're talking about establishing a pain pattern, we have to establish when it happens and why it happens. So we have to establish all the variables. What's the load? What's the duration that it happens, or that leads up to it? What's the frequency in which it happens? And then how regularly does it completely go away after a period of time? And then does it come back in 3 months' time? So you have to establish all of these as a pain pattern to be able to establish whether compression and flexion in a back extension is going to be a problem. Now, why I say to take back extensions out is because there are other exercises out there that do the job of building the lower back. You don't need back extensions. Back extensions have the risk of the high amounts of compression and the flexion that go into it. So if you don't know what your tolerance is to compression and flexion, then I wouldn't bother doing it, because there's a chance, because it's high amounts of compression, and this goes back to when do we flex the spine? Well, it's when we can deal with those loads. So if we can't deal with them, so if we can't deal with lifting a 12 kilo box off the floor, then I wouldn't worry about doing back extensions. You need to start on more simple exercises to build and then build and then build and then build. And then when you get to a certain level, okay, maybe it's fine, use a back extension. That may be fine. But that's where the understanding comes in, is when do we do this? Because a scientific study is saying it's okay to flex the spine when lifting. But what they haven't described to the individual is the limitations of how the study has been conducted and where spine flexion may not be a useful thing. Because Carl Jung, there's a book down here, Carl Jung, The Undiscovered Self. And in here, there's a really good example of how he describes scientific information. He says if you've got a bucket of pebbles and you weigh each pebble, and let's just say you've got 100 pebbles, and you weigh all of them, and the average weight of the pebble is 45 grams. But when you weigh each pebble individually, none of them are 45 grams. You've just got the average at 45, but none of them actually are. So what that's basically saying is science is great at pointing us in the right direction, but you have to understand the context that it was sat within. And you have to understand the self. So you can't just rely on science to tell you about the self, the individual, that means. As a trainer, as a coach, as a practitioner, myself, I have to understand the individual, not just the science. I have to understand both, because I need to know where the science is pointing me, and I need to know the context in which that science is sat within, and I need to understand the individual and put them together, because the science isn't going to help me understand every individual, as we've described with the sort of bucket of pebbles example, because none of those pebbles weighed 45 grams. It was just the average of all of them. So again, when we're talking about lower back pain, the spine flexion, tolerances, compression around the spine, we need to isolate them off individually. Another question I was given from him, how would I go about training a wrestler? So this one comes up a lot because they use spine flexion in their sport, for example. When they're wrestling, when they're grappling, they use spine flexion. And again, it's a part of moves to wrap people up in grappling and whatnot. So it is used. Now, again, what we have to understand is the lower back pain. Can this person's spine tolerate loads? Now, that could be down to the type of injury that it is. Do they have a disc herniation, disc bulge? How recovered is it? What type of anatomy of the disc do they have? Because different disc shapes means the disc can tolerate more loads than others. So we need to understand that. So we first of all need to understand the pain pattern. Then if we can, we need to understand the anatomy, because again, that's all going to help us understand what this spine can tolerate. But as a general rule, as a general path of coaching and of training, what we need to be able to do first is establish tolerance in neutral. If we can establish tolerance in neutral and build neutral up, what that allows us to do is, as we move out of neutral, it gives us greater margin of error. It doesn't mean that we're always going to stay there. And again, it doesn't mean robotic training. It just means a part is quite robotic, and a part of training is done in neutral. Because when strength and conditioning gets lost, is they try and recreate the skill. So for example, I train a real tennis professional. So real tennis is different to tennis. It's a sport in and of itself known as real tennis, and obviously similar to tennis in so much it's a racket, a ball, there's a net, they're hitting it back and forth, so on and so forth, but there are differences. Now, what some trainers try to do, and it's the same as functional training has tried to do, is they try to recreate movements. Now, what strength and conditioning is there to do is strengthen and condition components of training. So for a tennis player or a real tennis player, rotation and power is a big part of it. So I want to train rotation and power. I don't necessarily need to, in every exercise, recreate the skill of swinging a racket and the loads involved swinging a racket. I want to train power and rotation. So I can do rotation as a part of a warm-up to lubricate the joints, and then I can add some power and some fast movement to it. So again, this is how we need to understand some training. Is yes, we need to train movements. We need to teach people how to lift, but we're not going to teach them how to lift every different way of lifting. We need to teach them principles, which is where the components come in. So we need to teach them to be strong. We need to teach them to rotate. We need to teach them to lift. We need to do that with light weights, with heavy weights, and all these different types of things. But essentially what we're trying to do, and what I'm very conscious of now, is I'm just sort of going off on these tangents and it's not really being tied together. So I'm not going to go on too many of them, because it can get a little bit sort of all over the place with regards to what I'm trying to explain. But when it comes to training wrestlers, what do they need? They need mobility. So they need to be able to get into positions, and then when they're in those positions, they need, so if it's like a submission hold they're trying to go for, or they're trying to get into that position, they need mobility to be able to get into the position. That's a given. But what they also need is the strength to be able to then hold that position. But what we need to be able to do is build resilience. And again, if the person is in pain, we need to treat them differently to if the person is not in pain. So if the person is in pain during a particular submission hold, for example, then we need to work them out of that. So what that may then need is training in neutral, the removal and reduction of the pain, and then working back into that position, into that flex position, not going from, right, you are now out of pain, go straight back and jump in at the deep end and do that grappling submission move full tilt, full strength, because that could send them straight back to where they came from. You need to build them up to it. It's a longer process, and a lot of people don't like the longer process, but it's a better quality process, because let's just say when the spine is in full flexion, that's when they get a problem. So what we can do is we can train them, and then we can put them back in that full flexion, and okay, the pain's gone. Okay, good. It's done it once, but will it do it after 10 times? So okay, let's train them again. Okay, it's not done it. So each variable, have they done it? Okay, let's do it 5 times. Each variable we're training and going, right, 1 time is fine, 2 times is fine, 5 times is fine. So we're building up that tolerance. We can get them all the way to 10, and we can assess that along the way. Now, if they get pain in small amounts of flexion, what we need to be able to do, train them in neutral, and then start bringing them back into that flexion. So we need to take them into that flexion. Okay, was it there? No, it wasn't. Okay, let's come back out of it and go back and keep training, and let's go back into it and then back into it a little bit further, flex the spine a little bit more. Is it there now? No, it's not. So what we're doing is we're building tolerance outside of flexion and then going back into it, but we're going back into it gently. So if we use the throwing yourself in at the deep end, i.e. a swimming pool, what we're doing is we're getting out of the pool, and then each time we get back in the pool, we're going on to the first step. Okay, now we're going down to the bottom of the steps. Okay, now we're in at the shallow end. Okay, now we're in the middle of the pool at the mid depth. And then what we're able to do once we get to mid depth, okay, let's go to the deep end. And then when we get to the deep end and we're there and we can be there, then as soon as we come to that swimming pool the next time, walk straight down the deep end and jump in. Because what we've done is we've gone through all the stages and not allowed back pain at any of those stages. Because some people may be able to jump in, some people may need to walk all the way down. Again, it depends on the individual and their pain pattern and how we need to establish. So coming back to the study that I was talking about with regards to, if we go right back to the title, to flex or not to flex, is there a relationship between lumbar spine flexion during lifting and lower back pain? Again, we need to understand the individual. We can't just say that we've got however many people it was. Where is it? We've got, how many people was it? It was written here. Anyway, I think it was a couple of thousand people or a couple of hundred people that they reviewed, or the studies reviewed, and none of, or very few of them had a problem. So does that mean that they, or where was their tolerance to lower back pain is what I would question. Is it 1 time? Is it 100 times? Is it 10 times? Is it a weight tolerance? So on and so forth. So we need to be able to establish all of that before we can give the conclusion that there is no credible longitudinal cross-sectional evidence to say that a flex spine causes lower back pain. So that I'm going to end there. Hopefully this makes sense. There's a lot of information there that probably still needs a lot of explaining. If you do have questions, leave them down in the comments section below. I don't mind it being a slightly challenging question. That's absolutely fine, because there is more context that's needed. And if there are specific questions, I can give specific context. But it does take time to be able to write all of this out. So I'm going to end it there. Again, if you have questions, hopefully this has given you a bit more food for thought. Hopefully it's taken your brain down avenues where you didn't realise that were there. So you've started to open up new sort of fields of knowledge in your own mind. So thank you for watching. My name's Chris. Hopefully this has given you an idea of how I go about answering tough questions. Hopefully it's given you an idea of lower back pain, and hopefully it's given you an idea of dealing with tough questions, scientific articles, so on and so forth. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I'll speak to you in the next episode.